it's very easy to just dictate the direction of an investigation as long as you don't have the morals and the integrity to care about the justice of the system. The things that I did, but it also exposes you to the underbelly of the policing world. One of the things that I see is drug warrants being executed where a large amount of money and or drugs goes missing. All police services should have a polygraph upon entry. And I'll even go further to say is they should have mandatory policy that says that they are submitting themselves to polygraphs every 5 years for every member. Because the things that I've seen him do at the Palomino Club are questionable at best. Beginning the interview, I will discuss some of the training that I've taken in the past. I will go through just an overview of the things that I have studied as well outside of that in my life beyond policing. So initially, the police, they will provide you with standard training, which is firearms training, emergency vehicle operations, things of that nature. Laws obviously are going to have to be something at the top of the list too, Charter of Rights. But after that, then you would hit the street, and at some point your supervisor would suggest that you begin training in different areas depending on your personal interests as well as your strengths. Ideally, they would play less to your weaknesses, so if you're not very good at speaking with people, you wouldn't be considered as a community resource officer or media relations. Essentially, I was good in all positions. I have done community relations. I have done a number of more clandestine operations. I have training with handling and managing confidential informants. I have had to write a number of different warrants, so I have training in warrant writing, CDSA, as well as general warrants. Further to that, interrogation and interviewing, advanced courses in interrogation interviewing, not just entry level. Additionally, I've taken crisis management leading into hostage negotiations. There are very few hostage negotiators in Canada because the training is very specific to a person's skill set. I've also just taken courses and trained on Data Master C as well as Intoximeter, which are both instruments that are used to determine blood alcohol content. I've taken all the ranking exams leading up to my promotions. Again, I will not disclose which ranks I have worn. I have training in leadership as well as management. As a supervisor, you would be required to take these courses in order to best manage your platoon or your shift. I was also a drug recognition expert, which is exactly what it sounds and is used specifically to identify drugs in people's systems as opposed to alcohol. And I've attended numerous courses on domestic violence, gang operations, OMGs, which would be outlaw motorcycle gangs. I would attend conferences specific to exactly those topics, frauds, large frauds, gangs, just really the stuff that you see in the movies more so than the everyday beat cop would see. And over the 15 years that I was a police officer, I utilized all of those things. I was put into some very awkward positions because I did not feel I was ready to enter into those positions. But however, my supervisors, I guess, saw the potential in me, and they continued to push me forward, which was good in that I could receive all the training that I did and see the things that I did. But it also exposes you to the underbelly of the policing world. It's interesting because it seems as though every place you go, there is some type of a popularity contest. Like, there are certain cliques that get along better with others and they see more things, and the policing world is not so different. I was definitely in the in crowd, if you can call it the in crowd, I suppose, because the things that would happen there would be a lot of off the books things, such as going into prisons and jails and essentially telling people that you have something on them that you don't, in order for them to give up information on other people. Things like manipulating investigations in a direction that you feel would be appropriate to lay significant charges. This often comes into play when it comes to the drug scene, as well as gangs and motorcycle gangs. Because it's interesting, because police, they're not perfect. They think that they're doing the right thing for the communities that they serve. And yet I believe that if they understood how much more damaging the jail system and the justice system is, they would look at things somewhat differently. There are other candidates that would be much better suited to talk about that than myself, as they've been inside of the prisons and they know the system a lot better than I do, and they can speak to that better than I. But having had conversations with them, my opinion is that once you've entered the jail system, you will never leave it. And it's either done by intent or done with a lot of stupidity, and neither are really acceptable when you're talking about people's lives, because it affects the lives of the individual, but it affects the lives of their children, their siblings, their parents, and it often trickles down into next generations, just creating more. It creates more criminals. And honestly, if you take a person who's never been to prison and then put them in prison, chances that they will come out better connected and better trained to be a criminal are very high. That's one of the reasons why we see recidivism being as high as it is. As again, on the street, I would see people who would go into the system. So, for example, you'd have a kid who would be, 15, 16 years old, starts getting into trouble because he's hanging around with the wrong people. Mom and dad don't have a record. Mom and dad are being, good upstanding citizens as we would know them. And this kid just keeps getting in trouble because of the people he's hanging around with. The next thing, he winds up in some kind of a juvenile center, a youth center, and now he's making more connections, talking to more people. Very, very rarely do I see a person in that situation coming up better. If they come up better, it's literally a miracle, because it's designed to put people who are like-minded in a room together and giving them the opportunity and the time to discuss how to do their craft better. By the time these kids, they turn in their 20s and 30s, suddenly they have a record as long as you can imagine, and they have connections across the country where they can get guns, where they can get drugs, getting into things like human trafficking. They can essentially get into any field that they want to, and they have the community and the know-how how to do so. So the jails I believe that they have a purpose, because there are some people who, they don't want to get better, they don't want to change, and they are ultimately they are a risk to society. But again, keeping in mind that they were never born like that. There was something that caused them to become like that, and I believe that the jails are responsible for a lot of it, but there are also things like child and family services that are also responsible. Obviously, addictions are a huge problem, And it's never just one simple answer that will explain why a person is the way that they are. One thing that we will talk about throughout the issues that I see in policing, but in the justice system generally, I'll just read off of a list that I've put in front of me, just in no particular order, just ideally so I've hit all of the points that I was hoping to hit. I'll start with interesting things first, I suppose. So police initiations. Recruits will come into the door very unsure of what to do. It's obviously it's probably likely like their dream job. They feel as though they might be someone's hero. They think that they are going to change the world, and after a few years they will realize that the world doesn't change just so easily. But initiations absolutely happen. I've seen a variety of different ones. Just to give a little background, the recruit will come in fresh off the street, and they'll be assigned an FTO. That's a field training officer. The field training officers are typically selected because of their ability to be patient and to work with people, as opposed to just being very, very stoic and very standoffish. Because if you're dealing with a recruit, chances are they're somewhat young. If you stick a 25-year-old with somebody who's in their 50s, what are they going to talk about? There's just a lot of problems that can be avoided just by pairing the right two people together. But at the same time, places like the major centers, I'm going to pick on Winnipeg right now. Winnipeg has a significant problem with their cadets coming into the door. So Winnipeg has a cadets program, which are prospect constables. That is the best way to describe it. The cadets, they don't carry weapons, and they would typically not arrest people. They do things like traffic control, scene security, things like that. But it's one of the reasons that they do it is so that the constables and the sergeants can see who they are and get a feel for who they are. I would like to say that they hire their cadets with the intent to make them all constables, but obviously some people will not be a good fit. Some people don't realize what the job is and get out of it. However, there's also a second problem where the sergeants and the constables, they will look at certain cadets favorably because they see that they're willing to maybe make some choices that others wouldn't. And they're usually given preferential treatment when it comes to the hiring process. If you have, a dozen constables and a couple of patrol sergeants that will vouch for you as a cadet, the chances that you're going to be hired in the next hiring round, they're fairly high, which is not necessarily a good thing. It's good that they know who their personality is, but the problem is that the personality that they look for isn't always one that's completely honest. It's more like a loyalty issue. So the FTO and the new recruit, new constable, will get into a patrol car together. There's kind of an understanding in policing that if you have dirt on someone else and they have dirt on you, everyone's going to keep their mouth shut and look the other way. The FTO will then do something so that he can ensure that the cadet or the new constable will be loyal. Now, I haven't seen this with my own eyes, so bear with me. But the stories come out every hiring round about new initiation tactics that they've used. I've heard the FTO will provide the new recruit on day one, will provide him a bottle of liquor and say that, you're drinking this before the end of the shift, and I want you drunk at the end of the shift because I need to know that I have dirt on you. So if something happens, that you will have my back and I'll have your back. They will stop people on the street and essentially steal any drugs that they have on them, and the recruit will then be told, you're taking these drugs right now in front of me. And and then one has dirt on the other. It isn't so different from the movie Training Day, as a matter of fact. And if the beginning of your career is starting this way, you can imagine the temperature that sets for the future. And it's an unfortunate thing that, one of the things is that if everyone's skeletons stay in the closet, then everyone's skeletons stay in the closet. The problem is that when people such as myself start talking, those skeletons start falling out, and that's when the backstabbing begins. That's when people begin to look at each other and say, oh, I wonder if that's the person who talked. It just causes a lot of distrust amongst the membership, and it causes a lot of problems. So that is why the understanding is that you just keep your mouth shut and everyone goes home at the end of the day, which creates a humongous problem for things like falsifying notes. A bunch of cops will sit around and they'll share their notes for the shift. So cops will carry notebooks, and that notebook is essentially it's a log of their day. So in the notebook, they will write in it their patrol area, the shift that they're working on, the supervisor on shift, even things like the temperature, unit number, weapon number, things like that, taser number. And throughout the shift, they will write different things in it, even things like a change in temperature, change in weather conditions. That would be more so for traffic. But if there's an incident, and when there is an incident, somebody will write down the notes. Some people are good at writing notes, some people are not. Typically, rookies will write way too many notes, and the officers who have been on the job for a long time will take far too few notes, and Crown attorneys could definitely vouch for the same thing. What will happen is there will be a call. It'll be priority one. Everyone will go to the scene. The first cop or the first car on scene will see what they see and will write notes accordingly. Everyone else shows up after the fact. After that, then you'll see the cops show up to either stay on scene or show up to the station for a bit of a debriefing, at which point they will likely all copy each other's notes so that the story is consistent. That's obviously problematic because anytime you're doing interviewing or interrogation, you don't want to see everything being exact. You expect there to be differences in what each person saw, even large differences, like a victim of an assault may see the assailant as being over 6 feet tall, when the reality is they're barely 5'5", 5'6", and the reason for that is because a victim will often see their assailant as being bigger than they are, just due to the circumstances and the way that the mind works. So if you're falsifying these notes or you're sharing notes like this, it shouldn't be done. You should not be doing that, but it definitely happens. And there are officers that have gotten caught in court doing this, because when it comes to going to court, an officer is expected to use their notes as a reference for their memory, not as a substitute for their memory. So if somebody's reading things off of their notebook verbatim, in a cross-examination situation, the other attorney will begin to ask questions that may draw into question whether or not the officer is referring to his notes for memory, or whether this is a substitution for the memory, which again is problematic, because you shouldn't be telling someone else's story. If you're a cop, you're supposed to be honest. That's the idea. It's the integrity. But it also leads into other things like evidence fabrication. A couple things that I know that are done and have been done for quite some time are there's often a joke at the beginning of the shift. The members will joke that they have a throwaway in their duty bag, being a knife or a gun. And I won't provide much details on that, but essentially what they're saying is, there's a weapon in my bag that in case we have to shoot somebody tonight, I will plant this on them. That way we don't have to ask any questions later on as to whether they were armed or not. So that happens. It's not done daily. Don't mistake my comment for that. But it's a comment that's being made, and I've seen it done. I've seen guys have, knives and guns in their bag just in case. I've never seen them plant it on somebody, but it's happened. Another thing that will happen is police will, during an interrogation or during an interview, they will plant something in the interview room that will cause either the witness or the accused to either doubt themselves, suspect that there's evidence that there isn't, or just flat out lying that there is evidence that there isn't. So an example I could use is if somebody is, being interviewed as a witness, and there's video footage of an incident. Let's say it's a break and enter, and the witness isn't sure as to the suspect's identity. If the police are fairly confident that they know who it is, or even if they just want to pin it on somebody else, they will then have somebody from the office fabricate a photograph. So if the photograph from the still from the video shows a blurry face, they will then manipulate a video image or a photo of the person that they would like to go down for the break and enter. They'll put it on the evidence that they're going to show the witness. The witness will then identify a person, let's say it's Bob, and then what'll happen is that photograph will be seized as evidence. Even though it's been manipulated, they will, seize it as evidence for the court purposes. Then the photo is switched out for the blurry one, and then when it's brought to court, the witness will just agree to whatever photograph is put underneath their nose because the witness just wants to get off the stand, essentially. It's a stressful situation, and they will agree to anything. And cops know that. Cops know that their word is gold in court, and that anyone else is kind of mud. And it's happened in more than one situation where evidence has either gone missing for whatever reason, or evidence has been created for whatever reason. It's very easy to just dictate the direction of an investigation as long as you don't have the morals and the integrity to care about the justice of the system. If you're just looking to investigate for the purpose of throwing someone in jail that you don't like or that you believe should be in jail, it becomes extremely easy for police, and the accountability is a lot lower than you'd think. And something I'll mention inside of that is I think it's happening across the country, but I think Winnipeg definitely has a larger problem for reasons I'll discuss afterwards. One of the things that I see is drug warrants being executed where a large amount of money and or drugs goes missing. I've spoken to a number of people who have had drug warrants executed on their residences, and it never fails that money goes missing. And you may ask yourself, why would I believe these people? Here's how it works. When warrants are executed, there's a lot of money, a lot of drugs that are involved, and you'd like to think that the money that's seized goes back to the police, but it doesn't. It goes back to the government. So the police become frustrated with that because I think that they believe that they've done the work and they're entitled to a piece of the pie. So if they kick the door in and somebody has, $500,000 worth of cash sitting there, and they know that money is not going back to their pockets, as far as the department is concerned, that leaves a huge opportunity for them to just take the money. And you would think that the police wouldn't do that, and here's why it happens. If there's $500,000 worth of cash on the table, and the police realize that they could then potentially take it, Now you think that is not done because, that the integrity is above that, but that's a lot of money to anybody. So what happens is the money then will be logged as evidence, but there's only $300,000 logged as evidence. Well, that's beneficial to the accused as well as the police. So it's a win-win situation as far as the accused, because when he goes to court, the police will say there was $300,000 there, and that will look better than $500,000 there. If there was 10 kilos of coke and now there's only 5 kilos of coke, that will affect the judge's decision for his sentencing. So the accused is not going to say that's wrong, there was more money there and more cocaine there. There's no way they're going to say that because it's to their detriment. And the police aren't going to suggest that they've stolen $200,000 because obviously that's to their detriment too. So they can then just pocket the money and walk away. And I know it's happening. I know for a fact that it's happening. I've talked to enough people. The joke is that the Winnipeg police at this point, they are not cracking down on drugs because they want to get rid of the drugs. They're cracking down on the drugs because they want the cash. It seems to me it's between 25 and 30% of whatever's on the table, the police get. There's a number of different people that I've spoken to. That seems to be roughly the number. If there's, $40,000 in their pocket, $30,000 will show up in court. If there's $130,000 on the table, $100,000 will show up in court. And it would be interesting to run financials on some of the officers that are working for these drug warrants, because it's absolutely happening. And you talk to anybody who's been arrested for drug dealing in the province, and I can almost guarantee you that they will tell you the same thing. And the drugs are being taken because there's a lot of cops out there, cops, crowns, judges, corrections officers, sheriffs. They're addicts. They're addicts themselves. And I mean, I have a heart for addicts because my career pushed me into alcoholism as well. I'm sober many years now, but it's a serious thing. And it's unfortunate that it's not talked about more, but the drugs that would be taken from a drug warrant would definitely be either resold or just used. The interesting thing about if you have a major drug seizure, when there's like upwards of 10, 20 kilograms of cocaine or whatever it is, the chances of it being pure are really good. It's not something that's been tampered with after the fact. So if you are an addict, that would seem to be the best way to get a free and high quality product. I've seen members that come to work drinking or drunk. I've seen them come to work high on pills or whatever illicit drugs that they've got their hands onto. And I'm not aware of any police service that does drug testing on a regular basis. There are drug tests that are done after incidents like a shooting or incidents like maybe a motor vehicle accident, something like that. But other than that, on a daily basis, month to month, year to year, there is no drug testing done. And there are other issues that plague the police. Infidelity is humongous. Infidelity is huge. Later in the interview, I will mention names of people, just a couple that just occurred to me off the top of my head, that I've seen engaged in a lot of infidelity. It's interesting because there's almost an understanding that if there's a female member that sleeps with one member, they'll sleep with any member, and they just run through the whole entire list as quick as they can, and it causes a ton of problems. And that isn't to say that there isn't sexual harassment, because there's absolutely sexual harassment that happens. It happens every single day, and I think if female members were honest about it, there would be a lot of cops that would be in trouble. You've seen it in the news before, but typically these things don't go investigated well. They just bury it, and There are female members who have become suicidal over this, and if you look to other provinces, there have been some incidents of suicide where this has definitely been part of the reason. Infidelity just generally amongst first responders, firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, and cops. It's a well-known, well-documented thing that everyone sleeps with everybody because of the different shifts, and it's definitely caused problems in a lot of lives. It's due to the fact that you have a lot of different people working a lot of different shifts, and the entire aura of policing is somewhat secretive, so it's not a stretch to think that they will be sleeping around on their spouses, their partners, whatever the case may be. And it's a boys' club. This is an ultimate boys' club. It's essentially a gang where you're allowed in based on some very strict requirements, and you keep the secrets, and it's a status symbol. There are a few things in this world that are more dangerous than an ego, or than being in an in club and knowing you're in the in club and having that clout to walk around with and say, yep, that's my club, those are my boys, I'll go to bat for them any day of the week. It's ripe for a variety of problems. And part of the problem that you see happening is if you're not in the boys club, you are subject to targeting. You're subject to profiling. If anyone believes that the police do not profile people, they're mistaken. You're not supposed to, as a police officer, you shouldn't be profiling people based on their background or their skin color, any of those things. But it happens. Of course it happens. We're still all human and we still see things that we see. But at the same time, there's also targeting. If you cross the thin blue line, you are open to being targeted, and being targeted by people who have guns, who have your home address, who know what vehicle you drive, they know who your wife is, they know who your kids are, they know where they go to school, they know where you work. Absolutely, there is targeting that happens, and I've spoken with people who have been subject to such targeting, and police will get them fired, police will get them thrown into jail over nothing. They'll plant evidence. They will do anything that they can to get even. It's a little bit like the Stanford prison experiment, I suppose, in that there are almost no limits to what people will do when there's a mob mentality. And I've seen people who have been arrested for minor things, and then at that point, the police, they will either make that person's life much worse than it is. So they will go to, for example, if someone's released on conditions to be on a curfew, they will go to their work to do curfew checks at odd hours, just so that the boss knows that they're in trouble. They will show up to their houses really loud at all hours of the night so that the neighbors will see what's going on and start asking questions. They will, release paperwork disclosing the police reports just at random to, neighbors, potential enemies, friends. This stuff absolutely happens. It shouldn't be happening, and there are ways to counter some of these issues. But the chiefs of police are more politicians that are not so concerned about the day-to-day. It would be more so the staff sergeants, the sergeants, inspectors. Those would be the types of people who should be doing these kinds of things. And there are checks and balances. One of them is LIRA. That's the province's law enforcement review agency. As far as I'm concerned, they really have no teeth. They don't do what they're supposed to do. I know members who have had 10, 20 LIRA complaints against them for pretty substantial things, and they wind up just walking on it. LIRA is a bit of a joke. Some police services, Winnipeg, I'll use as an example again, they have something called the Professional Standards Unit. The Professional Standards Unit is the Winnipeg Police. And then there is the IIU, which is the Internal Investigation Unit, who they have a mandate as well. I think that their teeth have some bite, but their scope is much more limited. This is somebody who's already been under investigation, somebody who's broken the law very obviously, and typically they would have statements from other members against that individual. So the IIU is useful in some ways, but it takes a lot for them to even become involved. And you may ask yourself, how did some of these things happen with cameras in the cars, with body cams? Body cameras came out while I was still working, and the cops immediately hated them. There were some cops who thought it was good, because that way they knew that if they conducted themselves appropriately throughout the entire shift, they would always have a camera to back up what they have done. So if you see a cop wearing a body camera and he's happy about that body camera, he's probably a good cop. But if you see a cop wearing a body camera that's mad about it, there's probably a reason why he's mad about it. And we've seen, an incident will happen where there's some questionable things that have happened, and you go for the body camera to see what the video evidence is, and it's been tampered with. There's technical malfunctions is what has been used before. The memories have been wiped. I believe that some of the newer devices, they are secured I believe some of the newer devices are secured so that they cannot be deleted. But at the same time, you put a piece of tape over the lens or cover the microphone. There's ways to get around anything if you're trying to be nefarious. Another thing that I see happen is queries into CPIC. So CPIC is the Canadian database for criminal records. It stores, if a vehicle's stolen, it'll go onto CPIC. If it'll store, bicycles, boats, any of the serial numbers of stolen items, it'll go onto there, as well as criminal records and any conditions attached to somebody who's on charge. Those conditions are all typed out, and you can see them inside the vehicles. Most vehicles, I think every police service at this point, has an MDT in it, which is the mobile data center, which is a computer where you can access these things. There's different programs that are on it, but the essential ones are things like PROS or Niche, which are the same system, that just one is for the RCMP brand in certain areas use PROS. Actually, I think all of the police services in Manitoba use PROS except for Winnipeg. They use Niche, but they are made by the same company, so essentially they're the exact same thing. So PROS and Niche would be systems where you would type in what happened during an incident, who's involved, witnesses, things like that. But these queries are being done by members on the street just at random. CPIC has a very strict rule where you don't just query people for the sake of it. And it's to prevent things like if a guy and a girl start dating and the girl is a police officer, she can now just query this guy's background and see whether he has a record, see where he's been, see if he's ever been a witness to anything. Those are things that are very frowned upon. They're breaches of confidentiality. And if the members are doing that, they set themselves up for civil lawsuits and civil proceedings. But they're done all the time. They're done all the time. And there are checks and balances even to keep that from happening. The RCMP D Division headquarters in Winnipeg, they would be, I believe they are still the hosts for CPIC in Manitoba, and they would do all of the auditing. But for myself, I have spoken with the CPIC manager at D Division, and I have provided incidents where I know members have been doing queries outside of what was appropriate and asked that they do an investigation into it. And what was done was nothing. I don't even know if the investigation was done. It would seem to me as though they don't really care. And this goes back to as early as I was on the street. So, 2000. And those are breaches of confidentiality as far as policies and and agreements are concerned, but there are breaches that are happening that are far bigger than that. The highest law in our country is the Canadian Charter of Rights. It's common to all Commonwealth countries, but our Charter of Rights is the highest law in the land. And I've seen a lot of charter breaches happening, illegal searches, cruel and unusual punishment, just a bunch of really most anything on the charter has been breached. And the part that I find the most odd is that the courts are allowing it. I've seen conditions where people are on circumstances where the police can search them at any time for, 10 years, 20 years. That to me seems wrong. I won't get into specifics because it would possibly give away the identity of some of the people that we work with. Although I don't think that's very likely because these charter breaches are at this point so incredibly common that it would be very difficult to pinpoint. But it's happening, and I would like to see judges and crown attorneys realizing that these charter breaches are very serious. If we can't stand up for our highest law in the country, then, everything underneath that is subject to not only scrutiny, but it's also subject to some type of manipulation. If we can manipulate our highest laws, and if we can circumvent them, everything underneath that is meaningless. One of the things I would like to see happen, because you may ask yourself, what exactly is the solution here? What should we be doing? So many of the police services, they have a polygraph that is a portion of the hiring process. I've been on the polygraph before. It's not a fun experience, but ultimately, if you are who you say you are, you don't have to worry about it. I don't know anybody that has said, "Oh, I can't wait for the polygraph." It's not a fun experience. You feel as though you're in the hot seat the entire time, and for the most part, you just feel as though you are going to be arrested by the end of the interview, even if it was something as simple as stealing a candy when you were a kid. It's a terrible experience, and it's a tool that the courts don't necessarily recognize as being definitive, but it's a tool for police services to use during a hiring process. And incidentally, the Winnipeg Police Service does not use a polygraph. I think that may be some of the problems that they've seen in the past through their hiring. They have members there that have avoided places like, I'll use Brandon as the example because Brandon does use a polygraph, but other places like Calgary or Toronto or Vancouver, because they do employ polygraph testing. And it strikes the question, why avoid the major centers where the money is better, but are you avoiding a polygraph? Something I think should be employed is all police services should have a polygraph upon entry. And I'll even go further to say is they should have mandatory policy that says that they are submitting themselves to polygraphs every 5 years for every member. It would be somewhat of a costly endeavor because polygraphers across Canada are rare, but at the same time, I think it's a necessary thing because the example that I'll parallel it to is the physical aptitude testing. The RCMP use something called the PAIR, and most municipal services use something called the POPAT. It's a physical abilities test in that you have to pass in order to be hired because there is an expectation of some kind of a physical standard. Now, you've seen these cops on the street who are overweight, and you've asked yourself, well, how does that guy chase anybody? And you would be right to think that a lot of places they will employ a rewards program where, if you can pass the POPAT every single year, you will be given, a week extra holidays or something to that degree. And I think some of the police services, they will require that for the first 5 years of your career, you will pass the POPAT every single year at least once. I don't think that the polygraph is something that they should look at differently. I think a police officer's physical abilities are much, much less important than their integrity. I think that a polygraph would be something that would keep the integrity of the police services intact. And as you can see right now, I think that there is a major problem with our justice system holding integrity in the public's eye. And that includes the courts. So my suggestion would be not only is this done with police officers, it should be done with crown attorneys, court clerks, and judges, justices of the peace, all of it. Because these are the people who ultimately hold other people's lives in their hands, and their integrity is paramount. Their physical ability is far less important than their integrity. And I think that any resistance to that should throw up a lot of flags, because you can argue that the polygraph system is tedious, it's stressful, and it's costly. But throwing people in prison wrongfully is also very stressful. Throwing people in prison wrongfully is also very costly. And I think that the lawsuits would potentially be saved through all varieties of lawsuits throughout the entire justice system would be saving money by doing polygraphs. And just because something is costly doesn't mean it's a bad idea. And just because something is costly doesn't mean that it is something we should avoid in order to maintain some type of integrity in the system. My suggestion also would be to crowns and judges, not just cops. And the reason for that is because the cops are the ones on the ground. I know I have a lot of friends who are cops, and they have a difficult job because the drugs in this country are out of control. Dealing with people on meth especially is extremely volatile. I've seen meth users who have gone from being very docile, very easy to get along with, right to the other end of the extreme where they're violent and, they're experiencing hallucinations, psychosis, all of the above. And that's a hard dynamic because it can flip on a switch. So I understand that cops have a hard time, managing some of these things. And I would like to think that in a polygraph situation, they would just be honest with what happened and there would be some leeway for them. But crowns and judges, they're in a different position where they're not the ones who are throwing a person into jail for extended sentences. They're not being held on bail circumstances for extended conditions. So for them to have a high level of integrity, I think we would all agree is extremely important. And again, any resistance to having a polygraph at a set interval, 5 years, should be welcomed. It shouldn't be something that is resisted, because it's a lot easier. Let's hypothetically say you have a judge who has, how many thousands and thousands of years have they gotten people incarcerated for? If at the end of a 30-year career or a 25-year career, you find out that that person was corrupted the entire time, you have 25 years of damage to control. If there's a polygraph done every 5 years, that then will reduce or minimize the amount of damage that person has caused. And although we'd like to believe all of our judges are always doing the best in everyone's interest, the reality is that they are human and things happen. Maybe they're paid off by someone with a lot of money. Maybe they have a vested interest in, putting someone in jail, or, and even deals. I know that deals are made all the time in the courts. If you have two guys in the same circumstance, they're both on bail, and one person is using legal aid and the other person is using a paid for lawyer. For some reason, the guy who's on legal aid always gets a stiffer sentence, all things being the same. And I don't know whether that's on the judge or the lawyers, but regardless, that would be showing favoritism, which if the judicial system is unbiased, those are the things that should not be happening. So my recommendation would absolutely be polygraphs all around every 5 years for anyone involved in the judicial system. And it would also prevent, there's certain specific units that police services employ, like guns and gangs, street crimes units, and what their job is essentially is just to keep the drugs and the guns off the streets. Because those are the two biggest problems that I see. But they do it in such a way that is completely illegal. I've talked to a number of people who are addicts on the street. They've been addicts on the street, and they've now recovered. And what has happened in the past is, and this is time and time again, I've spoken with, dozens, we'll say, of addicts or people who have, beaten addiction, who said, I was working a corner, or I was, selling drugs in this area, and the street crimes guys rolled up on me. I had $500 in my pocket, and I had, an ounce worth of crack cocaine on me. Instead of arresting me for any of that, they just grabbed my money. They left me $20 and took all my cocaine and left. And it's time and time and time again, I hear this happening, is that these street crimes guys will come, grab the dope, grab the cash and leave. And they'll say, well, we'll leave you $20 so you can buy another 20 piece and get high again. If their job is to get the drugs off the street, I understand that and I can appreciate that. But what happens in that situation is they're leaving themselves open to accusations of theft. And what are you doing with the drugs? Are you disposing of them? Because the way that property management works inside of an evidentiary chain of custody is that when you seize property, there is a chain of custody. It's witnessed usually, especially when it comes to cash or drugs or guns. It's witnessed. Cash should always be double counted by another member, and the evidence bag or notebook should be signed off by two members saying that this is what it is, and that validates it. And if there's any issues, you know who to go talk to. But what is the purpose of not logging these things into evidence? Especially considering if the goal is to get these guys off of the street, especially the guys who are selling drugs, why not lay a charge? An ounce of crack cocaine is easily, especially when found with cash, would easily be enough to lay a charge for trafficking. And inside of that, what are you doing with the drugs? We already spoke about drugs and alcoholism affecting police officers. My suspicion is that they could be using it themselves. If not selling it, but definitely using it themselves. And the cash, I mean, anytime there's cash involved, the opportunity to steal it for yourself, maybe split it with your partner, whatever the case is, it opens itself up. And if you do this, 3-4 times a week for $500, that's a nice little kick at the end of the week, as far as monetary gain is concerned. But even still, even if it is being logged as evidence, which I would be extremely surprised that it is, why are these thefts happening during drug warrants? Usually when there's smoke, there's fire. And what I see is when there's warrants being executed and money being stolen, and then the corner boy on the street is also getting his money stolen, and none of it's finding its way to the courts, it makes me wonder where exactly the money and the drugs are going. And again, this would be something that a polygraph would definitely resolve. I'm going to now go through a few police services that I know members of, that I've worked with, that I've gone to conferences with, that over the years they struck me as being very odd. And not just odd in that their character was odd. I often wondered, how are these people police officers? Some of it I've seen firsthand. Most of it I've seen firsthand, as a matter of fact. But because I was in the boys club, I was in the in club. There were certain people that would talk inside of that circle, and you would know what they were saying is true, because it just always ended up, firstly, being true. But second of all, there was no concerns of anybody talking in those circles, talking outside of the circle. So because I was in those circles, I can tell you these things have happened. And this is only a very, very brief list. This is just some of what I believe are concerning issues. I could name a lot more people by name, but the producer has asked me to not try and throw every single person under the bus that I could. So I'll be respectful of that. I'll start with the Brandon Police Service first. You may have heard and read in the newspapers years ago about a member by the name of Dallas Lockhart. He was involved in some interesting situations, but Dallas, in my experience, is he's a bad person. He may still be, I don't know. He was the sergeant in charge of Brandon Police Service's training division, being that he would train recruits in use of force, and he was just generally overseeing the entire training program. Dallas thought it was appropriate one night to bring a taser to a house party. Tasers were relatively new at the time, and he would walk around and just tase people at random. It wasn't even a voluntary thing. It was just walk up and zap somebody. Anyone else who would have done that would have been charged with assault with a weapon or aggravated assault, depending on the circumstances. But definitely it would have been charges. And he was investigated, but I don't think that the investigation was done fairly. And again, I think that maybe there was some witness tampering, because under any other circumstances, you can't imagine walking around a party just assaulting people and it not cause some kind of problems. But further to that, as the training sergeant, I've talked to a number of recruits that have went through his training program. He hates women. He's very, very different towards women than the male members. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, he has no issues with going much harder on the females, and he justifies it by saying, because you're smaller, you should have to work harder, because this is what real life is like. But you'd see him walk away smiling afterwards. You'd suspect that he maybe had some sadist tendencies, because he's dishonest, and he's violent, and he's a person who I still to this day cannot believe has a job, and let alone be putting any kind of trust in him for training new recruits with that kind of a background. It absolutely baffles my mind. Two people, there's two brothers, Curtis Calcutt, he is a BPS member, and his brother, his name escapes me right now, he works at the Brandon Correctional Center. These two brothers they think that they are above the law. They have no issues with beating people unnecessarily. They will fabricate evidence. I am privy to some information where I'm aware that Curtis was domestically violent against one or multiple of his partners, but never charged, obviously, because Curtis was one of the guys who was one of the boys. So when other members would show up on scene, if they were called at all, he would just, expect them to let him go. And he would arrest people too and take them to the Brandon Correctional Center, fully knowing that his brother would deal with it inside. They have property. Their family has property outside of the city, and it's been more than one occasion where people have been taken to that property and beaten up and left there. Yeah, these are people who should not be cops. I do believe that Curtis has left Brandon Police Service now and has gone to Winnipeg Police Service. You're going to see a pattern here of bad members that have somehow migrated to the Winnipeg Police Service, and I don't think that's by mistake. But I can't say for sure, because my knowledge of these people is not as recent as others. There was he left as a staff sergeant, and he went over to being the chief of, at the time, it was the Dakota Ojibwe Tribal Council. They had a police service. His name was Doug Paulson, and he was an alcoholic. He was extremely violent. He was known to beat suspects in custody. He was known to be very abusive towards his wife. He would beat her almost to death sometimes, and no one ever charged him for it. I don't mean to throw ill at the dead, because he did pass away recently, but it is a matter of fact that this happened, both while he was working for the Brandon Police Service as well as the DOTC. And as the DOTC, he was the chief of police. I know some of the DOTC members. I believe they've been changed to the Manitoba First Nations Policing Service, but historically they've had a very colored past. I do believe that it is better now than it was, due to some hard work by a couple of people, but it was a very colorful past for them previous to that. Staying with the Brandon Police Service members, Gunnarsson and Friesen, I mean, these guys too are definitely in the in club. They, Ryan used to work with Dallas in the training division, so I'm sure that they're not dissimilar in a lot of ways. And there's, interesting enough, during a conference that I was at, there was a member there, and I don't know what her last name is at this point. I heard that she and her husband were both members of the Brandon Police Service, but I heard that they were separated. So Alice, it was or is Potter, I'm not sure. She is, although I don't believe she is someone who abuses her authority as a police officer. Her private life is extremely questionable. There were members at the conference that would basically be walking into her room one after another, just having sex. She was heard saying that she would rather be a hooker than to be a cop, just because she could be having sex all the time. Again, I was not one of the people that was involved in this, but when you have dozens of people talking about the same thing, where there's smoke, that there's definitely fire. And again, she's entitled to living her private life as she pleases. Maybe she's changed in the past years. I'm not too sure, but my inkling was that she had been like this for a while. And the rumor was that Brandon Police Service employs a polygraph for hiring. She had applied numerous times prior and had always failed at the polygraph. The rumor is that Alice offered some sexual favors to the polygrapher and then was passed. So I again questioned whether, first of all, why was she continually failing the polygraph, and second of all, her hiring would be based on, some negative things. But I mean, the Brandon Police Service has some fantastic members too. They have a member, I've met him once before. Barbeau is his last name. He's a fantastic member. He's very easy to get along with. He, I believe, is somebody who could be doing media relations, because he has a background of, my understanding, his background is he was always viewed as somebody who would not make it as a police officer because of his indigenous descent, and he made it, and is a really personable guy. Other members like Bruce Evanishin, I believe Bruce was always a very, very upstanding person. He would say something was wrong when it was wrong. He was involved in the ident for a while, so that's a very high standard of integrity to be managing evidence and doing things like fingerprints and, things that are very critical to homicide investigations, especially. Going over to it's now the Manitoba First Nations policing. There's a few members that have been there in the past that have definitely tarnished their reputation. One of them, which I'll mention, is Conrad Delarond. Conrad is a womanizer and has been looked at for sexual harassment on dozens and dozens of times. He came from Ontario for the Treaty 3 police, and there was always a cloud of question happening around Conrad. I believe Conrad was as far as policing is concerned, he was an okay cop, but his sexual harassment was apparently quite prevalent throughout his entire career. I don't know anybody from the Treaty 3 police that can verify that, but the rumors floated over from there, and they were rampant throughout the Manitoba First Nations policing. He did bring his son along too. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but everything that I've heard about his son is very different from his father. So I guess good with the bad. There have also been members in the past who have kind of paralleled Brandon Police Service in that a couple of their members are very violent. There's a member that his name was Warren Trescott. Again, I believe he may have moved to Winnipeg Police Service because he's no longer with the Manitoba First Nations policing, and I know he had talked previously about going to Winnipeg. Him too, he was rude, disrespectful to everybody, absolutely hated women, would beat up anybody that in cuffs, doesn't matter whether they're in cuffs or out of cuffs, in cells, the back of a car. He was extremely violent, putting his gun into people's faces, things like that. Just an attitude that should not be used, regardless of the circumstances. I understand police have to use their guns from time to time, for certain things. And I've never had to discharge my firearm at a person, but there have been many instances where I have been extremely close and I thought I was going to have to kill somebody on that shift. And there are other things that have plagued Manitoba First Nations policing over the years. Again, I do believe that they're better now. They had a few people who came in and really took control of something that was out of control, because there was, I recall, and I won't name names, anyone who's been charged formally by the police or investigated to the end by the IIU successfully and has either been found to be guilty or innocent. I'm not going to mention by name because they've obviously already dealt with their charges. And my purpose here isn't to throw dirt in anyone's face for what they've done in the past and answered for. My concern here is for stuff that's being done that is not being answered for. And I just don't want to get caught up in some kind of, dragging skeletons out of a closet that have already been exposed. But the DOTC at the time, they had a situation where they had a bunch of members and I think support staff that were stealing. And again, I don't recall what, but there was a bunch of charges that were laid with regard to that. There was a member that was charged with domestic violence. Actually, I believe there's a few members that were charged with domestic violence. And it was things that plagued the police service for quite a few years. But there's a couple of people there now who are really good. I think that they've made a big difference. One of the members that I will mention is Devin LeBlanc. He comes from Brandon. He could have gone to work for BPS, I believe, but Devin is, he used to play for the Wheat Kings. He's a good guy, and he does a lot of community relations. I think that he may have had a bit of a rough start in policing, but he was young at the time, and to me it seems as though he's really straightened his life out and made a lot of headway. I'll talk quickly about the Morden Police Service, and it may seem odd that I'm mentioning Morden, but Morden and Brandon are much alike in how they work, and even some of their members have come from Brandon Police or are closely associated to the Brandon Police in some way. One of the people I'll mention from there is Sean Awney. Sean Awney is an interesting character. He's extremely friendly. He's extremely gregarious. He gets along with just about everyone. And again, he's definitely in the in crowd. The problem that I have with Sean is that he seems to recruit people to do his dirty work for him, so he can keep his hands clean. There's been a number of members over the past that have kind of fallen into that trap. And I think Sean's intentions are for the most part good. Because he does reach out to people, and he does, he does reach out to people in a way that makes you think he's your friend. And yet at the same time, in the back of his mind, I believe he always thinks that everyone's, a potential mark for him. And there's been a few people who have become subject to that. And he's closely associated with a Winnipeg member by the name of Rob Duchin, who I will speak about last, because I think that of all the Winnipeg members that I know, he has some very interesting things that I'll talk about, some comments that I'll make. But Sean and Rob are or were, I can't speak to the present day because I've disassociated myself with these people years ago. Sean and Rob are friends for various reasons. Inside of that, they were doing a lot of drug investigations, but although Morden has been around for a long time, I don't think they've ever had a serious drug bust. Nothing like Winnipeg, nothing like Brandon, and definitely nothing like the RCMP would have had. It's kind of the running joke is that they think that they're LAPD SWAT, but meanwhile they're just, working in some little ghost town. A few years back, this would have been, I would think it would be around 2010. Morden Police Service, they got their first dog canine unit, and there was a member by the name of Adam Hebert who was the first handler. The dog's name, I believe, was Chase. So Chase was fully trained as an attack dog. There was a lot of police services at that point that had only drug dogs and not so many attack dogs. Brandon has a couple of both, but this was the first one in southern Manitoba that I'm aware of that was an attack dog. Adam left town for whatever reason. Maybe he was on a holiday. I don't recall what it was, but he left town and just left the dog in the kennel. The dog got out of the kennel, and it's a use of force option. The dog is now running the streets of Morden, and obviously it looks very bad for the police. So Sean Awney, he had the recently initiated Winnipeg Air 1 helicopter come out with their FLIR and try to find the dog. Interesting enough, Rob Duchin, I don't know if at the time, but Rob Duchin was in charge of Air 1 for a time. And I can't help but think that there was definitely some influence there. Now, I don't have such an issue with what happened in that they should have found the dog quickly because of how an attack dog behaves, right? I mean, it's trained to bite people based on their behaviors and commands, and the handler wasn't there. So the dog needed to be taken into apprehension quickly. But the fact that they hid it from the entire community, possibly even from the own chief of police, I don't know at the time what Brad knew about it. But the whole thing was really sketchy and just not a good look for the police. Adam, I've met him once, maybe twice before. He is a very interesting character as well. Just off the top of my head, I recall him being a very lazy cop, barely even putting his uniform on correctly, never shaving his face, just all around lazy. And incidentally, I do believe that he's left the Morden Police Service and again gone to work for Winnipeg Police Service. So we have three members that I can think of off the top of my head that have all gone to the Winnipeg Police Service who all have a very tarnished background. And then Rob, he's an interesting cat too. He used to do training. Maybe he still does training for, he will be the person who do a course on firearms recognition, being that if someone is carrying a firearm, there's a way that they walk. There's certain ways to identify people who are carrying a firearm, and Rob used to do the training for that. So Rob was, again, very much in the in crowd as well too, and he would be always the center of these things. And a lot of the guys like Sean Awney, they really looked up to him. There was another member. It was Sean's right-hand man there. His dad worked for the Brandon Police Service. Bell, I don't remember his first name. Yeah, Constable Bell from the Morden Police Service. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. The three of them, they would often go to, it used to be the Palomino Club next to D Division headquarters, and they would get just extremely drunk. They'd be picking up women. All three of them are married at the time. Maybe they are, maybe they're not at this point. I don't know. But they would be picking up different women. They'd be taking them to different hotels. It was always the three of them. I mean, there was other people that would join, but they were always at the core of it. Some of the courses that we go on to do training are located in Ottawa. And all the cops that go to Ottawa for training, things like warrant writing, hostage negotiations, things like that, they go there. And there's a bar that's not too far from the training center. It's called Pig Al's. Everyone knows that that's where the cops hang out, is the strip club. And when I would be there, because, Manitoba is a small place, essentially, you would see other members from Manitoba, and you would know who they were. Guys like the Morden guys, especially Bell, I don't remember his first name. He would go there and he would spend exorbitant amounts on strippers, like thousands upon thousands of dollars he would spend on strippers and prostitutes and escorts. But again, like Sean Awney would have been there, and absolutely, if Rob could have gotten a way to get there, he would have been there too, because the things that I've seen him do at the Palomino Club are questionable at best. Wearing a firearm into a licensed establishment is, you can't even wear a knife into a licensed establishment, let alone a pistol. And he would do it all the time, and people would just look the other way. And it does make me wonder how he got to where he is, because the story is that he's, two people. If you see him at work, and I have seen him at work many times, you'd almost mistake him for being, religious, like maybe a Mormon or something, because he's so proper. He doesn't curse. He's so different from his alternate personality, and it's just, it raises flags for me, because to see a person in two very duplicitous ways, I would question a lot of things going on just because of that. And the more concerning to me, that really the reason I'm bringing up Rob is because he's won a Governor General award somehow. And he sits in a fairly high position in the Winnipeg Police Service at this point. And I know that if he went on to a polygraph, that job would be done very quickly. I could say a lot more about the Winnipeg Police Service as well, just based on, even just going to Winnipeg for different reasons, training I've done in the past. But the misconduct that I've seen and heard of through other members, it's pretty extensive. I don't know what the solution is to all of this, but I think it's important that we have the conversations, because if we don't start having these conversations, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. I will add that I had a person, because of my current line of work, I have conversations with a lot of people that you would not guess that I would. And I've come to trust some of them more than the public at large would. And the reason that I trust them is because sometimes I'll hear a story and I'll think to myself, well, that sounds outlandish. And then, within a few days or a few weeks, I find out that everything was true. That to me raises a level of trust, that they're telling me the truth. So one of these people, he talked to me about Winnipeg Crime Stoppers, and he believes it's a scam. So without providing too much details, a few years back, he called Winnipeg Crime Stoppers and provided a tip to an officer regarding guns, drugs, and a large amount of cash. The information that he provided was very current. It was, days old, and the officer thanked him for his time, gave him his ID, his tip ID number, and said if there was any arrests made in the incident that he would be liable to get some reward money. I have the tip ID in front of me right now, so we could do some double checks if we want to, but he assures me that this is true. So the tip ended up having 2 individuals arrested for exactly what he said. There were no guns involved, but there was a substantial amount of cash and drugs. And he was fully aware of all of the details. So it was, to me, having written in as many warrants as I had, there was likely an investigation already pending, but just the level of detail that this individual would have definitely, finished the ITO, and he would have been, the police would have easily have been able to have a judge sign it off. So after this all happened, about a month later, he called the Crime Stoppers and began, the process for collecting his reward money. The police initially denied that there was even a tip made, but then when he provided the tip, the member said that the arrests were not made by Winnipeg police. It was made by another police service, which is odd because the arrests were made in Winnipeg, and regardless, Crime Stoppers should be paying for tips provided, because Crime Stoppers isn't just a Winnipeg thing, it's a Canadian thing. So either one of two things has happened here, is that the member he was speaking to is mistaken, which would seem strange considering there was a tip number provided who he confirmed was in the system, or two, the Winnipeg Crime Stoppers generally speaking, does not pay out tips. They only take the information and are advertising that they'll hand out money, because in my mind, this individual should have been definitely paid out for what happened, because there was, kilograms and kilograms of different products that were seized, and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. There was potentially firearms involved too, but at the time of the arrest, there were no firearms that were found. He's convinced that it's a scam, and because of that, he said it was for the safety of a few people. He really didn't want to call Crime Stoppers in this situation, but he didn't see an out where everybody could, remain alive, and ideally, people wouldn't be killed through some of the products that were there and the guns that were involved. So even through all that, he's convinced that this is a scam, and he will never stick his neck out for the Crime Stoppers again for that exact reason, because being a snitch obviously is a very bad thing in the drug scene, and he stuck his neck out for the police to only tell him that they wanted nothing to do with him.